views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime. Of course, we want to thank you for joining us. As we know, every week here on BronxNet, we bring you the Social Justice Forum, and it gives you an opportunity to provide a deeper understanding of the issues as well as the inequities that many people face. But also, we also have the opportunity of presenting multiple points of view and promote civic engagement. So stay tuned because the Social Justice Forums starts right now. And welcome back. Well, recently, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced new commitments to further invest in Black entrepreneurs across all 5 boroughs in New York City. The BNYC initiative is the first of its kind model, which aims at increasing the number of Black-owned businesses in New York City with a focus on growing businesses in high-growth industries as part of the city's commitment to close the racial gap and support Black-owned businesses. The Department of Small Business Services is releasing the landmark Black programs for business owners, and the report highlights the challenges Black entrepreneurs face when starting and growing their own businesses. Our next guest is the co-founder and CEO of TresseNoire, which is a beauty tech startup empowering women of color to celebrate their textured hair with a personalized beauty routine that works. She's also the co-creator of Black Women Talk Tech, which is the largest membership organization of Black women tech entrepreneurs and the only conference designed for that in the community. Well, joining us to provide their point of view on this matter, I am pleased to be joined by the BNYC cabinet member, as well as co-founder of Black Women's Talk Tech and TresseNoire, Regina Gwynn. And Regina, good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. It's an important discussion to have. I think when we talk about Black wealth and when we talk about entrepreneurship, the two go hand in hand, but so many times across the country, the two are distinctly different because of the fact that many times Black entrepreneurs and wealth, there's that gap. So give us a little bit about your company and how you decided to start this going.
Sure. So I launched TresseNoire in 2014 in a response to the frustration that I was having in just getting my hair done. Had gone to multiple hair salons. You're in a salon all day, you're bringing your laptop, food, water, computer, all types of things, and wanted to find a better way to kind of just give Black women back some time. There's so many things that we have to do every day, and worrying about how to get your hair done shouldn't be one of them. So we created a virtual beauty coach that takes our personalized data and combines it with our algorithm to provide product recommendations that are given by our network of stylists. So just making sure that, we can actually give women back the most important resource on earth, which is time. So going through that journey, going through that challenge, navigating this technology ecosystem, I had no idea what I was doing. Didn't know what a cap table was, didn't know what a tech stack wasn't familiar with technology languages and coding and engineering, but I knew I had an innovative idea that was disrupting an industry that largely, Black women consume 9 times more personal care products than our counterparts, and really drives an $11 billion industry. And so it was going through that journey that I realized that there was much more opportunity for women to be resourced much better in starting their technology companies. And that was the impetus behind creating Black Women Talk Tech. So myself and 2 other co-founders, Sosa Ighodaro and Lauren Washington, we all are tech founders ourselves, and decided to create this collective of Black women tech entrepreneurs that are focused on building billion-dollar businesses. And that's through looking at education, promoting and changing the idea of what a founder looks like, along with promoting the idea that that innovation comes from everywhere, grounding that with research and ultimately funding. There's definitely a huge challenge to getting access to capital for Black businesses and for Black technology companies in particular. So we want to make sure that we're highlighting these initiatives And that, with working with the city of New York has been amazing in bringing some of those challenges to light.
Yeah. Well, talk to us about starting from the bottom and now you're here, right? Because you start at the bottom and you really, you said there's some things I just really don't know. Walk us
Yes.
through the challenges that you have in terms of getting to the place of owning your own business and then really crossing that tech divide. Because you said there's a lot of things that I became accustomed to that I really didn't know anything about.
Right. Absolutely. So, I think being being a student, just going back and eating a bunch of humble pie, and saying, I don't know, I think is step one. I've gone to tons of conferences. We've participated in several accelerators in the New York area. We've been really, really lucky and fortunate to connect with investors who believed in our mission and our vision, as well as understanding the market and understanding the product that you have is extremely valuable. Those are some of the first things, that framework and kind of mindset that I had to get into in order to continue to push through, asking the questions that are uncomfortable, and spending, unfortunately, a lot of money. There were a lot of failures in the very beginning, looking at or finding the right, coding languages, finding the right infrastructures to even build your startup is very challenging. And without that technical support early on, there were definitely a lot of missteps. So I'm thankful for the technical lead that I have, who's actually based in the Bronx, and someone that I really trust with the system that we have now. But it's not easy. There's a lot of knowing, being comfortable with being uncomfortable is part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur in general. And then also understanding from a technical perspective, what are the resources that you need to identify. Again, I'm not a coder by trade. I know enough now to be dangerous, but knowing that you need to fill those skill sets, needing to fill those gaps in what you don't know is extremely important. So connecting to the tons of resources that are available within the city of New York, I think it was very critical for me, going to meetups, going to conferences, finding the right people, networking a ton, telling everyone about my business. I talked about my business constantly because you just never know who knows someone who can help. And Black Women Talk Tech has also been an amazing resource, finding other like-minded entrepreneurs that are all working on something that does not exist currently. If it existed, then it wouldn't be hard, right? You'd have a blueprint. You'd know what steps you're taking in order to get to your goal, and you'd understand what good looks like. But you're crafting these innovations from scratch. So being able to be around like-minded people was super important, and it continues to be. I continue to have advisors and mentors and masterminds and groups of women and men that help me think through what is the best way forward and how are we monetizing these opportunities for commercial success.
But talk to me a little bit about the obstacles, right? Because one of the goals is to really close the digital divide. And
Yes.
that divide is huge. And when it comes to African Americans, when it comes to communities of color, we know that we're on the other end of the spectrum when it comes
Yes.
to dealing with that digital divide. You had an intent in mind of saying, listen, I'm going to use my company, I'm going to use my business, I'm going to put networking together, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to close the digital divide. Give me a little bit about how hard or how wide is the divide?
Oh, definitely. So just to give you an idea, let me tell you, just to give you an idea, Black women raised 0.02% of venture capital funding here in the US. And that translates to about $45,000 versus $1.1 million on average that a white male investor can generate in venture capital funding in their initial raise. So the gap is significant. $45,000 versus $1.1 million is a lot of money. And when we think about how we're using those dollars, right? So technology is not cheap. To pay an engineer, to pay a product developer, to pay a user research, user experience, UX, UI types of team members, these are people that need money. There's not a bartering system that you can create, which is oftentimes why it is important to have technical resources on your founding team. A founder who is also an engineer, a co-founder who's also can be your CTO, your chief technology officer, is really important. Friends and family round, which could be anywhere between $250,000 to $500,000, it's called a friends and family round because traditionally your friends and family help you raise that money, right? You get a loan, you get money from your parents or from your aunts and uncles and from your friends. And so I don't know about you, but I don't have friends and family that are giving me $500,000 to start a business. And so I think therein lies the challenges where, particularly for entrepreneurs of color, we are put at a disadvantage from the beginning. So it's hard to overcome that type of gap in the beginning because you're constantly behind in terms of the resources that you're using that traditionally could be offered for free or could be available within your family. If you don't have a family member who's a coder or an engineer that helps you build your first website for free, if you don't have accountants and lawyers and bookkeepers and graphic designers in your family, you're paying for those things from the door. So from the outset, you are putting out money and you're bootstrapping in light of the lack of funding in several different ways, not just the money, but also the additional resources. So the gap is pretty significant.
Yeah, and so here comes the mayor. The mayor says, listen, I'm going to, create this initiative to really fund and make sure that Black businesses get their fair share and have an opportunity. So give me your thoughts about the mayor and this initiative. Some people say, listen, it's long overdue, but some people say, I'm glad it's here.
Absolutely. So we're really excited about the work that's been done with the city of New York. The report that was generated from over 1,500 entrepreneurs across the city really gave us a lens into, the unique challenges that are faced for those that are, in these 5 boroughs. And the one of the first initiatives that's part of this program is an accelerator, which I'm really excited about because oftentimes you've got these great ideas, but how are you actually making them happen, right? Like there's one thing to say, okay, I have a great idea, but there's another thing to actually put the resources behind it to actually make that work. So a $3 million initiative is being dedicated to an accelerator program specifically in New York that's cultivating small businesses. This is also put into place with a lens towards technology. So how are we thinking about small business and scaling it to think like a tech startup? This is the part that I think that was really interesting in terms of the report that showed that there are tons of small businesses, but there's still this digital divide, right? So you've got this great idea and you've got a local business, but this business could be international. It could be global if we think about infusing a tech perspective and an infrastructure that can allow them to make even more money outside of just their local area.
And so when we talk about African Americans, communities of color being involved in tech, obviously there are a lot of people who are out there, a lot not doing it at the level that you're doing it. So give a piece of advice to somebody who really wants to take it to that level, but maybe frustrated with the process because when we know, trying to get involved, trying to raise money, trying to get your business going, it's very painful sometimes. Yeah. And as you said, failure is the order of the day, but some people just don't have the capacity to deal with failure. Other people say, listen, when it comes to failure, I really don't want to go through that, but we know that that's a part of the business process. But for somebody who's watching right now and considering tech, because they do technically see a lot of people who don't look like us in the tech field. But the reality is there's so many people who are working in communities of color trying to advance in the world of technology.
Absolutely. So, it is not easy. I am not going to sugarcoat anything. Building a startup is hard, whether it's technology or not. Building a startup is hard. However, part of your entrepreneurial journey has to incorporate the hustle. And the beauty of New York is that there are a ton of resources available there. If you do become immersed into this culture and connected into this network, you will find the resources that you need. It won't just be served up to you on a silver platter. But I do think that not only the city of New York, but New York Tech Meetup, Black Women Talk Tech, Black Men Talk Tech. There are tons of organizations that are dedicated to getting Black businesses the resources that they need. So I think step one is to follow us on blackwomentalktech.com, but also think about what you need and why do you need it. Part of the piece of the puzzle is really just getting smart on what you need and what you don't need. So, taking it step by step, putting one foot in front of the other, but more importantly, do it. Instead of waiting, don't overthink it. You have the tools and you have the intelligence and the idea to make it happen right now. And that's the part that I really want to drive home today.
Right. What would you consider, the turning point for you in your business career?
There were a couple of, I think that I had two points in this journey that are of note. The first of which was my participation in the Google for Startups entrepreneur program for Black founders.
Mm-hmm.
That was, transformational. The resources and the connections that I made during that program really helped TresseNoire refine its business strategy, really hone its message, and really put us on, that track to future growth. We also landed our second major investor during that program. So that was amazing. So that's also why I understand the value of accelerators. And I think, having this accelerator program, supported by the city of New York is again, just like super smart, and I'm excited about that. And then I'd say the second inflection point was working with Black Women Talk Tech in 2019, I'd say. I guess seems so long ago, but 2019, our conference that we hosted in New York was really, the first time we brought, over 1,000 people together. We started Black Women Talk Tech in a small conference room, gathering 30 or 40 women in 2017 to talk about, their challenges in being a Black woman-led tech startup. And fast forward just 2 years later, we had over 1,200, a little over 1,000 people, engineers, entrepreneurs, technologists, investors, again, really highlighting and shining a real light on what we were doing and the innovations that were still happening and performing well in spite of that funding gap that I mentioned earlier. And so that was kind of like a wake-up call. It was like, okay, we're really here. We're here in numbers. These innovations are viable. And I think that that's the part that it made also investors and companies take notice. And so the conversations that we're having now are really valuable. How people are, really reaching out, not only talking about how can I help, but how can I invest? These are untapped markets and untapped opportunities that savvy investors would do well to invest now and to get on the ground floor. Imagine, an investor who was the first money in at Uber, and the first money in at Facebook, and the first money in at Airbnb. These investors have made significant returns as a result of those, early bets. And so we have now created a community of women that you would do well to bet on early.
Regina, Gwynn, thank you. We got to leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Congratulations on all the success that you had, and hopefully you'll come back and visit us again on the Social Justice Forums.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you. All right, Regina Gwynn, our guest here on the Social Justice Forum. Listen, I want you to stay with us. We do have more show coming up. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back. The Broadway Advocacy Coalition builds the capacity of directly impacted advocates, artists, students, organizations, and communities to use the arts as an integral part of their social change work. Founded in 2016 by members of the Broadway community as a direct response to the nation's pandemic of racism and police brutality, they've since grown into a multidisciplinary organization uniting artists with legal experts, as well as community leaders, to have a lasting impact on policy issues, including criminal justice reform, education equity, and immigration. The BAC recently has announced the first year of its Artivism Fellowship, created to support artists, and the fellowship will provide financial support, mentorship, networking opportunities, and educational workshops. The inaugural year of the fellowship will specifically support Black women, as well as transgender, who are artists, activists, focused on the issues related to systemic racism and criminal justice reform, using narrative or stories in their work. And joining us now to provide their point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the Broadway Advocacy Coalition's Chief of Staff, Dria Brown, and also Facilitator, Nia Akilah Robinson. Both representatives are also facilitators of the Artivism workshop, I should say not workshop, fellowship, and we welcome them now to being here on the Social Justice Forums. Ladies, good to have you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so happy to be here.
Thank you. So for somebody who may not be so familiar, why don't you just walk us through a little bit about the work that the Advocacy Coalition does?
Okay, so we're gonna make it short and sweet. The Broadway Advocacy Coalition started 4 years ago this month. Some fabulous members of the Broadway cast shuffle along during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. Thought, how could I use my skills as an artist to make change? And so, from my understanding, there was a lot of dressing room talk and a lot of get-togethers and some Facebook posts, but they knew that they wanted to make a difference and that it just wasn't enough to be on the stage. So they organized the Broadway for Black Lives Matter event, which was their first relationship with Columbia Law School, the start of that relationship. And it included performances from artists like Billy Porter and India Irie, alongside lawyers, advocates, and police officers. They wanted to know what rage and curiosity could lead to, and how, we could empower those in our industry to use our voice and our artistry to enact change. And since that event, we've been finding new ways to combine the power of storytelling with the leadership and experience of those most directly affected by the issues of mass incarceration, systemic racism, educational inequality, and immigration. And we've been creating new ways of collaborating that allows artists like Jesse Williams or Audra McDonald or Lynn Nottage to work side by side with advocates to change these broken systems.
We talk about coming together. You have the artists on one side, you have advocacy on the other side, and they really come together. Nia, talk to us about that partnership and the difference that makes, because usually when we talk about Broadway, activism and being engaged at this level, we haven't really seen before, but now it's becoming more and more the norm.
Yes, for the arts in general, it can be one of the most impactful ways to have activism within it. Within our craft, this is one of the ways that it gets out the most to people who may not see it initially. So especially collaborative, I would say collaborative areas like theater and film become the biggest platforms for seeing, like, okay, so if I see this narrative, how does this make me feel at the end? And I know when I see theater or when I see film myself, I want to walk away with a new idea of how I want to see the world, what I want to see the world. I want to see something new. I want to know something new. So as artists, we know also that maybe we don't know enough about others' experiences, which is where the advocates come in. Advocates, community leaders, those who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system offer up their voices to us, and we try to interpret it and create art from that.
So we talk about Broadway for Black Lives Matter, and that's a huge activist, and that's huge advocacy right there. For people who don't know, talk to us a little bit about Broadway for Black Lives Matter.
This year, we started a virtual event, and the first day was a day of healing. And we asked Black industry members to come in and to share their stories and to really hold the space that was sacred and private so that we could commune and fellowship together and be equipped with tools to help us sustain our mind, our bodies, and our spirits in the world. Some of those tools were in the form of resource bags that the guests left with actionable steps to dismantle the systems that perpetuate racism. The second day was a day of listening. And this was an opportunity where we invited industry guests and stakeholders to listen to the experiences of those most directly affected by systemic racism in the theater industry. On the panel, we had LaShawns. On that panel, we had Ruben, OGs in the game saying, my experience has been no different than Amber Iman's. And the third day, we had a day of accountability. And that was a free-for-all for everybody to come and to learn and to listen again to these industry giants, both Black and white, tell their stories, offer ways of changing that dominant narrative. And we created a pledge, the accountability pledge, that really allowed you to take a seat back and begin to reimagine an equitable theatrical landscape. And we asked non-Black members of the industry to sign this pledge. And that pledge means that you will take the necessary steps to making this industry equitable and safe for all of us, especially our Black brothers and sisters and siblings. That was our...
Let me jump in here when you talk about taking that pledge, right? You talk about taking a pledge, and those who are not Black and those who are not, from communities of color, to really be an ally, right? And you're asking them to be a part and be an ally. Talk to us about what that was like and what the response was like, because there's some people, as I was sharing a little bit earlier on another platform, that there's some people who will do it in the moment because it's the good thing to do. And then there's other people who have this lasting commitment to say, listen, I just don't like the way that things look. And when I look at Broadway, when I look at theater, and when I look at film, and when I look at television, I can really see these inequities that can be done. Yeah.
And we want a good mix of both. We want the people who, as I like to call it, are engaging in performative activism. And we want the people who are actually going to take the steps to be co-conspirators in change. And the reason why it's so important to have that first group is because art and the amount of pressure that we're going to put on these people is going to be monumental in reshaping the way that they see the world. We're not going to let them forget it, and we're not going to let them forget their responsibility in signing that pledge. And we're also and talk about what our responsibility as an organization in putting out a pledge like that. What are the steps we take? What are the steps we all take? No one is off the hook. And so it really gave the industry a little bit of hope. I saw a lot of Black artists had a lot of hope in looking at a list that was 6,000 people had signed that pledge. And it gave us hope that when we return back to the industry, that things may not be so tight and rigid in Black and brown skin. And I think it is allowing all of these gatekeepers and stakeholders to recognize and have a more keen awareness of what's going on in the world, because you can't pretend you don't know anymore. And I think that was what that pledge reminds us all of.
Yeah. And so, Nia, in my introduction, I talked a little bit about the Artivism Fellowship. For somebody who's not familiar, please walk us through and share with us a little bit about the Artivism Fellowship.
Of course. I would say the Artivism Fellowship has been a long time dream of the organization, and we were able to partner with the Broadway musical Wicked to support the launch of this program. So with this inaugural year of this fellowship, it will support a group of Black, cis, and transgender women over the course of 6 months in the use of their artistry to have an impact on issues related to mass incarceration and systematic racism. We have also an amazing group of women in the nominating committee this year, including Broadway actor and BAC founder Amber Iman, and local advocates like Zakia Ansari of Alliance for Quality Education. So with this fellowship, it was really about gathering us, creating a space that's safe, a space where, the AAVE, African American Vernacular English, is something that's already understood, something we don't have to explain, something that's supposed to, you can even show up on to one of the meetings in a bonnet, because it's supposed to be that communal space for artists and advocates who may not have had this platform, especially with us Black women who may not have been given the opportunity to have this platform, but are so steeped in the work that, you know, we just wanted to provide those opportunities because we're in this, we're in the work, we're providing social change, and this is one of the ways we just amplify it.
Yeah. And share with me a little bit about the obstacles, right? Because coming out, right, and talking about these things, social change, and really highlighting the work that you guys are doing, it also talks about, you know, well, it speaks to, there's some clear obstacles that are present in our workplace, in our field. Share with us, from your perspective, the obstacles that you see and what you really would like to see happen in the area of social change.
There's something about opportunity, and there's something about having a platform where the way we speak, the way we communicated can be founded in a safe space. I know for myself, you know, when I went to school, I wasn't, you know, I didn't think I was that smart. And when I say that, I mean, you know, I was a writer, I was a playwright, and I am a playwright, but I didn't necessarily conform to the rigidity of, you know, our primary to secondary schooling. So within that, there is sometimes a hesitancy to even sign up for something like this, because we think, oh, I don't know if I can fit into this mold. I don't know if my voice can be heard in the way that I speak, or the way that I communicate, or the way that I advocate for change. And I think with this specifically, what's so special about this is that there is room for anybody. And we have a video where we talk about, on our B-Way at advocacycoalition.org/Artivism Fellowship, we have Dria and I saying, if this is something you didn't even think you would ever apply to, please apply, because there are creative ways that everyone is focused on in their tellings of their specific narratives that they like to share. And there's a unique juice and flow to the way Black women love to communicate. And it's so unique and so different that sometimes it's not given that platform because it's so unique and so different, which is why we've provided this fellowship.
Mm-hmm. So Dria, talk to us a little bit more about the fellowship and what it means in the lives of those people who are actually participating in it, because for many people, it's a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially during this time, right? During a pandemic, I feel like opportunities are few, and we're still trying to navigate how to keep our artistic voices tuned and in shape so that when the world opens back up again, we'll be ready for it. And I think opportunities like this allow you to sharpen the sword, but also I think with sharpening the sword, our fellowship is gonna teach you a lot about the revolution of rest and joy and of taking it easy. Not often do Black women get to take it easy. And so we wanna make sure that, you know, hard work is expected, of course, but there will be so many moments that we are gonna have joy intentionally. This fellowship is a paid opportunity, which is rare. And we believe that we pay anyone who comes on our team. That is a value of ours. It will increase networks on both on BAC from the wonderful fellows we gather, and for the fellows to be connected to all the wonderful resources and relationships we already have as an organization. It will be a chance to explore and dream. We were curious about passion projects and dream projects and just really wanting to get to know the personalities of our fellows. There will be guest speakers that are curated based on what the fellow needs or what discipline the fellow is creating art in. What else? Workshops and a final presentation at the end. And this will be a time of 6 months where we get to fellowship together as Black women and to unpack and heal and create art and to have an opportunity to be in a room with like-minded individuals and create a really, really safe space to be vulnerable in. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah. We're almost at the end of the segment, but I do want to get the opportunity out there for you guys to be able to share. If somebody wants to get connected, how do they get connected and how do they become a part?
If anyone wants to apply, it is a nationwide opportunity that you can find at buadvocacycoalition.org/Artivism Fellowship. And if you can apply, but you want to donate, there's also opportunity on that website to do so. And applications are actually due at the end of the month.
Well, we want to thank you ladies both for joining us here on the Social Justice Forum. We want to make sure that we stay connected to you. And as you guys continue to do stuff, make sure you come on back and let us know what's happening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to have you. All righty, listen, we got to take a quick break. We do have more shows. Stay with us. We've got more on the Social Justice Forum coming up right after this. And welcome back. The Legal Aid Society's Racial Justice Unit aims to tackle issues of racial justice and equity, both in the courtroom and within the city's largest legal services group. They work to ensure organizational policies, practices, and systems fit within racial equity framework. The RJU raises critical awareness of the systemic oppression communities of color experience through the use of research, public policy, advocacy, impact litigation, community engagement, and strategic communication. This unit is grounded in principles of racial equity and social justice, providing visionary and strategic leadership to ensure every facet of their organization promotes racial justice. Here to provide her point of view on this matter, I'm joined by Supervising Attorney at Legal Aid, Ann Oredeko. And thank you so much, Ann, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Good. And so I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about the work that you guys are doing in your racial justice unit. When we talk about social justice, we know that a part of social justice is the racial inequities that people have to contend with. So share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing there with some of the racial inequities that we're seeing across our city.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting working at the Legal Aid Society. As you may know, we work in so many different areas of law that impacts communities of color, especially low-income communities of color. So my work kind of cuts across all of the practices of the Legal Aid Society. So we do juvenile rights work. So we work with kids who are being removed from their families in ACS cases, as well as representing young people who are charged with criminal offenses in family court. We also do work in the criminal justice sphere with our public defender office, our trial attorney offices, where we represent the vast majority of people who are accused of crimes in all 5 boroughs. Additionally, we do appellate work, we do prisoners' rights work, we have the decarceration project that's aiming to try to depopulate jails in our city, and also push for policies that will depopulate pretrial incarcerated people throughout New York State. And then we also have our civil practice that does more than you can even think about. We do immigration work, we represent people in housing court, we deal with health advocacy. We also work with communities that are facing gentrification to support small businesses. So our work cuts across anything that might impact a low-income person, specifically, more than likely a person of color. As we know, New York City is full of economic inequalities, and those inequalities, Black and brown people bear the brunt of those things, right? So Black and brown people are more likely to be low-income New Yorkers. And so our work essentially is to serve them and to help them confront these systems that are created in a way to ensure that inequality continues and that it's generational. For economic inequality is generational, and incarceration is more likely to be generational as well through the current systems that we live with.
Yeah, and when we talk about some of the things that we're dealing with here is for low income individuals. One of those things is the issue of bail, and we know that the bail reform law that's out there, a lot of controversy surrounding that. But I know that you're doing some work with regards to bail. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing, it's really frustrating that the bail reform that we had achieved last session was quickly rolled back before we could even implement it. There was already a public push, not even a public push, right? It was very much the police, PBA, as well as the media that was used as a tool by the PBA to really change the narrative around what is fair and around safety. They really try to take one or two off cases to make it seem like an epidemic was happening. And it's frustrating because we know who is still going to be harmed, right? We were able to salvage some pieces of that, and the bail reform that we originally had was already a compromise, to be frank, right? We worked with DAs, we worked with multiple groups to be able to get to that place. And then for the inroad to happen to roll it back, it became frustrating to watch something that we fought hard to get for people
Right.
who are already being in systems, to see it watered down even further. It's still in effect. For most misdemeanors, you cannot have any bail set. The vast majority of cases, and the biggest fear that we were facing was whether dangerousness would be put into our bail statute, which has never been a part of the New York bail statute. And I think it's really important, especially for Black people, to really recognize why dangerousness is a terrible phrase to have in any criminal justice statute. Just because of the way racism functions and anti-Blackness functions in this country, we are inherently seen as dangerous, right? So when we're looking at police murders, when we're looking at police brutality, oftentimes the crux, the unspoken thing, is that inherently a Black man is seen as dangerous. Inherently a Black person or Black communities are seen as dangerous. So when police use excessive violence or murder to try to control us as Black people, our culture in this country really struggles to confront that underlying anti-Blackness, right? To really confront what they're saying when a police officer says, I was afraid that this unarmed or a 12-year-old playing with a toy gun is doing, right? So if our bail statute had incorporated dangerousness, we'd be looking at a significantly higher rate of incarceration pre-trial for Black and brown people, specifically Black people, because we will be seen as dangerous by the courts. We're already battling that, and the language is not there. So there were some wins in that we were able to protect certain things, but generally speaking, it's disappointing to see that change.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about defunding the police, because that's a major talk that's been out there right now about defunding police, taking money away from the police department, redirecting it and allocating it in other ways that could possibly better serve the community. Your thoughts about that?
I mean, I'm all for it. If you want my thoughts, I'm like, yes, take money from their bucket, because they have the biggest share. They have the lion's share of our budget. And as we can see, even with the way that our budget came down this year, we are still seeing violent crime. And the reason why people were predicting that we'll see an increase in violent crime this summer, long before the push for defund, long before any of the stuff that's happened in recent months. But back in March, when they were already talking about getting rid of the summer youth program, right? Or when they were talking about reducing funding for some of the arts programming and other programming, or especially when they were talking about reducing the money going to our Department of Education. The reason why people were predicting that violence was going to increase was because we knew that those structures, those community engagements that young people have access to, one, provides actual financial needs for families. It's not just like a young person being able to go shopping, like families budget for that money. Mm-hmm. Two, it provides access to other types of engagement that doesn't leave them with very little support, right? A lot of our young kids in our communities, especially our kids of color, do not have access to, tennis tutors and swim lessons. A lot of them are essentially supporting younger siblings and supporting family members in whatever economic means they can. And so the uptick in violence only indicates that not that bail reform changed anything. Bail reform was already in place and we didn't see any change. it actually more so reflects the fact that we have not invested in our communities. So when people are demanding defund the police, we're naming the fact that the police haven't created extra safety. We have one of the largest police forces in the world. Actually, if you look at the NYPD, you can name it as one of the biggest militaries globally. And yet our city still sees violent crime. So it's not having more police that creates safety. What creates safety is people having their needs met, right? Making sure that folks have access to healthcare, and not just the worst version of healthcare, but like substantially better healthcare, including mental health access, and not just with social workers who also, within systems of oppression, everyone is touched by that. So it's not just having social workers come in, it's also making sure that we have people who are adept to address the needs of communities of color and not bring in white supremacist ideologies or pathologizing our communities. It's also making sure people have access to good jobs and jobs that don't exploit our communities, right? So you're not doing work that is toxic or harmful to you. You're doing work that pays well, that gives you access to a better life than what you were able to have before getting that job, right? So we have a budget, we have our tax dollars, and our city consistently makes the choice to reinvest in things that are not actually providing people with getting their needs met, which then creates the system of a cyclical system of poverty, which oftentimes when you look at communities that are poor, people are desperate. And when people are desperate, they oftentimes do things that are antisocial. So if we really want to attack the underlying issue of what makes harm happen, what makes violence happen, we have to attack the fact that we are not investing in our communities. We're investing in the police, who consistently come in, harass Black and brown people in our communities, are harmful to us, right? Like if you talk to anybody who's like 17 in this city and you ask them if they're a person of color and they live in Brownsville or East New York or Flatbush, they're going to tell you that they don't enjoy interacting with the police because the police treat them like they're dangerous, going back to the language that we're saying around anti-Blackness, right? Like they treat them like they are villains when they're just young people trying to live their lives.
Yeah, and when we talk about young people living their lives, I mean, you think about the amount of challenge that they actually face in life, and one, you don't want it to be the NYPD, but unfortunately for many people of color, that's a real fact, that their interactions with police, some are warranted, yes, but the unwarranted are what I think most of America does not really get the full grasp and the understanding about. Being Black in America has definitely been, when I tell people, and I've had conversations before about, you know, being Black in America, when I tell people you really don't understand the gravity sometimes of the weight of what it means to carry a skin color, that sometimes you're just hated just on the basis of your skin color. And I know that you're also doing work with hate crimes too, right? And we're seeing recent hate crimes increase here in New York City. What's been your office's response to this rise that we're seeing of hate crimes?
I mean, I think oftentimes when you look at hate crimes and the use of trying to police hate crimes, what you end up finding is that the communities that are supposed to be protected by that legislation end up being the ones most likely to be prosecuted by it, right? So legal aid, I think we discussed in the media before, having a client who was a queer person who was also prosecuted for committing a hate crime against another queer person, right? You oftentimes see already marginalized people. So I'm talking about trans people, I'm talking about trans people of color, trans women of color especially, Black people and other marginalized groups are the ones more likely to be prosecuted under hate crime legislation. I really wrestle with the idea of trying to use the criminal justice system to reform or change people's behavior, right? We look at hate crimes as incidents that are very public, but I think when we talk about hate crime, we don't talk about societal hate crimes, right? The fact that the vast majority of Black and brown children in this city go to overcrowded, underfunded, and honestly not well-managed schools, that is a hate crime. That is a hate crime towards our children, right? When we look at the fact that for the vast majority of Black people and brown people in our city, we were the hardest impacted by COVID-19. And to be honest, we are still waiting for the second wave. So we don't even know what those numbers are going to actually look like by the time this pandemic is over. And because we don't have access to proper healthcare prior to this crisis, we live in communities that are more likely to have environmental factors that detrimentally impact our health. And we live in a society that creates such tension, anxiety, and stress on our bodies, but because of the fact that we live in this color of our skin, right? The fact that we are Black, the fact that we are non-white people, we have extra stress just by living a daily life. That is a hate crime. And yet we don't prosecute our city government officials for that. We don't legislate that, but we try to control individual behavior when we really should be talking about what societal choices are we making? How can we change that behavior to actually give people the ability to live? Not just like, no, forget live, thrive. I don't want to just live. I want to thrive. I want my children to be able to thrive. I want my family to thrive. I want my friends to thrive, right? So yes, I'm not supporting hate crime legislation, especially I think recently they're trying to, and maybe this has changed, I haven't stayed up on this to be honest, but I know that they were trying to make harming a police officer a hate crime when we already have legislation that makes harming any public official bumped up to a felony. So if you were to slap a police officer, that is a felony assault. So adding the hate crime legislation, overdoing it to say the least.
Right. Excessive.
Excessive. Thank you. Excessive. I'll leave it there because I can't say the word right now.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think it's a lot of things that sometimes we don't really pay attention to because we know that there are protections already in place for law enforcement. We know that if you do strike that officer, you are gonna pay a heavier penalty than if you do a regular individual. It's already bumped up. And so good point there talking about that. Before we go, I want to get a chance to talk to you a little bit about this one thing, abolishing. Come on and share with us a little bit about abolishing.
Oh, let's abolish. Yes, I'm here for this. So oftentimes I think people feel anxious around conversations around abolishing the police or abolishing prisons and jails because people really do fear for safety, right? And I think that's a genuine concern because humans are flawed. We are not perfect. We harm people even if it's unintentional, and we harm people even when it is intentional. But having our state weaponize its ability to control violence because of the way this country was formed, we as Black people especially have to recognize the fact that we will always be used as fodder to create an illusion of safety that doesn't exist, right? So with police abolition, when we talk about safety, and we talked about this earlier in our conversation, it is very clear that when you see the safest communities, you see communities that have everyone's needs met or people have access to be able to get their needs met, right? Policing as a whole, if you look at how it grew up in this country, and even when you look at like policing as it started in Europe, right? Like it was used by the British to try to ensure that the Scottish and Irish people that they were trying to dominate would adhere to their rules, right? And then you see how it came to be in this country. It started with slave patrols in the South. It started in the North as a mechanism to control labor. It was capitalists who pushed to be able to ensure that they forced people to work, even in conditions that were not safe. Like that's how policing started, especially even here in New York. So when you think about this system, it was never really created to create safety. It was created to ensure the interests of those with money, the interests of those with power are enforced with violence, right? And so if we are trying to live in a society that actually reflects the need for everyone to be safe, as well as the need for everyone to have access to resources, and that is refusing to use violence as a tool or a mechanism to control populations, we have to think about abolishing the police, right? Like they were never designed for what we keep trying to force them to do. And even the police will acknowledge that. Like when they are sent to deal with like somebody in mental health crisis, they know they have no business doing that. They're not trained for that. And yet here we are, right? Or when the police are told to go into certain communities, what they end up doing oftentimes is harassing the people in those communities that behave like an occupying force, right? Moving on to other parts of abolition, because we don't have to just stay there when we talk about police abolition, we also have to think about jails and prisons. When people are incarcerated, even for the most heinous crimes, the vast majority of them at some point will come back to our communities. We know that prison especially does not give people the tools they need to come back to our communities and be healthy, productive members of our society. If anything, we know that they are going to be given a scarlet letter that would keep them from being able to access many things that they need to be able to ensure that they can provide for themselves and their families. So we set them up for failure. And we torture them prior to sending them back into community where they're set up for failure, right? Like if somebody was to ask you right now, I'll give you $100,000 for you to stay in prison for 20 years. Would you sign up for that? No, like nobody would, because we know that it's not a place in which it's not a life-giving place. It's a place that literally is full of death and suffering. And it's toxic for the people who even work there, right? So if you go and meet with corrections officers, there is something that starts to shift in people's brains when they are given like ability to be in power over other people and use violence against other people. And so you see like an uptick with law enforcement officers across the board of self-harm or violence in families. So I'm talking about domestic violence. You see an uptick because we are literally creating systems of violence that do nothing but feed into violence, feed more violence into our communities, even if it's indirectly. And so for Black people and brown people in this country, specifically Black and Latinx people, we are pushed into these systems, right? We're pushed into jails and prisons. We're also pushed into positions where we are the people who are corrections officers, because that is one of the few jobs that pays well in our communities. Mm-hmm. And then you see cycles of violence continue. You see parents who are more abusive. You see partners who are more abusive. You see people being violent with their family members because we are literally training them how to be more violent. So if we want a society that actually is safe, a society that doesn't feed off of the blood of our communities, we have to get rid of these systems. And we have to think of creative ways to deal with harm. Because truth be told, we still have murder, we still have rape, we still have child abuse, all these things still happen. So we're not even successful with the systems we have now, right? The vast majority of people who are raped do not report it. Most people out there who are rapists have never been brought to account. There is no accountability for that behavior. And yet we pretend as if our society is safer. So how can we actually start to change the way we think about accountability, the way we think about safety, the way we think about moving away from punishment and torture into actually giving people the tools they need to be better people to each other?
And Oredeko, we got to leave it there, but I want you to know that we want you to come back to the Racial Justice and Social Justice Forum to talk about racial justice and continue this conversation. I think that there's a lot of things, layers that unfortunately we as a society don't pay attention to. And when we take a deeper look at them and we understand them a little bit more in a holistic way, there's an education that people are getting. And unfortunately, a lot of people have been living in ignorance. But nowadays, it seems as though the light is coming on. But thank you for shining your light and shining the light on a lot of different topics. And of course, we got to have you come back and share more with us more on some of these other matters.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this conversation.
All righty, thank you. We want to let our viewers know that, yes, we have come to the end of our show here on the Social Justice Forum. Be sure to stay connected to us here at BronxNet TV as we continue to elevate the conversation, talking about the issue of social justice, talking about racial inequities, and we continue to promote civic engagement. For all of us here on the set of the Social Justice Forums, I'm Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless, we'll talk to you soon.